Right on.
Hello, comrades, and welcome back to the channel. I'm the Obnoxious Anarchist. Today we have a very special guest on the channel. We have Dr. Abraham Weizfeld joining us, who is the chairman of the Revolutionary the Revolutionary Jewish Bundist Diaspora Movement, and is a second-generation Holocaust survivor by both parents, who escaped the Holocaust from Warsaw and Lublin in Poland by finding refuge in the USSR. So, Doctor, thank you so much for joining me. It's good to see you.
Good day to you, and it's good to be able to say hello to a whole new generation of revolutionaries.
Hey, it's going to be great to talk to you. So the introduction that I gave was lean, but it was purposely lean so I could leave you room to elaborate. So please, Dr. Weizfeld, introduce yourself.
Well, we formed up a united Jewish Bundist diaspora movement, was centered in Phoenix, Arizona. And this was a result of, international flow of ideas. And I've been trying to rebuild the Jewish Revolutionary Socialist Bund, since I founded the chapter of the Jewish People's Liberation Organization, or the Jewish PLO, so to speak, in 1989, with the publication of the book, The End of Zionism and the Liberation of the Jewish People, published by Clarity Press in Atlanta, Georgia. And before that, it was just very, small scale local organizing in Toronto. Then I went to work with the Palestine embassy during the war of 1982 to 1985, when the Zionist state invaded Lebanon and occupied Beirut and, brought its allies, the Phalangists, into the Sabra Shatila camp and massacred 3,000 Palestinian refugees in 3 days. And that was the first book that I produced in 1984. It was published, the book was called Sabra Shatila itself, the name of the refugee camps, which I had visited in 1980 when I went to speak with the PLO, and I spoke with Yasser Arafat at that time too. I guess I was one of the first Jewish people to speak with Yasser Arafat.
Wow.
Maybe the first person to speak with him. But
that's very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's been but I never had the problem of trying to break away from the Zionist indoctrination that, most Jewish kids, are subjected to, because my mother was a Bundist, Jewish socialist, anti-Zionist, from Warsaw, and she escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto, with her, by way of her brother, who was an organizer in the forest in Russia across the border, and a partisan later on. And it was lost as a partisan when he was, after he was conscripted into the Red Army. So there's quite a history there, and I carried it, with me because of my mother, who educated me to be an anti-Zionist, from the very beginning.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you how you got into politics and all that, all this kind of stuff, but I guess, it was very deeply embedded in your family. I guess both your parents were politicized, or was it just your mother?
No, both. My father was a socialist also. I mean, all the Jewish working class were socialists at that time in Eastern Europe, even if they were Orthodox like my father. And my father's father, my grandfather, who I never knew, he was a Chassid, from a shtetl, a little town outside of the city of Lublin, in the south of Poland. And then my father was modern Orthodox because he shaved off his beard because he wanted to get a job.
Yeah.
And, he was a socialist as well, And then in the refugee camp where they met, after they got out of the USSR, the Zionists came, to try to convince them to go to Palestine. And there were even fights, between socialists and the Zionists, because the Zionists were trying to put pressure on people to do so. So
and this was in Toronto you're talking about?
Oh, this was in the refugee camp in the American
all right.
Germany.
Okay.
Where my parents met, first of all, where I was conceived in the refugee camp, in effect. And so my father explained to me that the reason why he didn't want to go to Palestine was that he didn't want to go to another war. And the Zionists, were not religious. They were just, using the religion as a front, for their colonial project. So.
And we can see that clear as day today.
Yeah, and that was clear as, quite clear to me, even before 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank and the Sinai and everything. And so, I was organizing in Toronto, the Jewish Alliance, Jewish Non-Zionist Alliance. Yes, that's what it was called. And in 1973, we had a counter demonstration to a Zionist rally, during the war of 1973, when Egypt attacked Israel's occupation of the Sinai Desert.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Zionists had a big rally, that was scheduled prior to the war beginning. And then we came along with a big banner, 20 of us, mostly Trotskyists and anarchists.
Mm-hmm.
No communists. The communists were supporting Israel at the time.
Oh, wow. It's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Communist Party is reactionary, basically.
And this is the Communist Party here. You're talking about the one in Toronto, the one in Canada?
Yeah, the Communist Party of Canada used to exist.
Yeah.
A couple of pieces, and neither of them exist any longer.
Wow.
What a bankrupt political ideology it was.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So then we had a demonstration there. We were up in the balcony around the Nathan Phillips Square of the Toronto City Council, City Hall area. And so we went up onto the balcony around it, in order to protect ourselves, because we didn't want to, be face to face, with the Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
So we unfolded a big banner saying, not all Jews are Zionists. And so only 3,000 Zionists turned up that day, because I don't know, they were so demoralized, by attacked and nearly losing the war against Egypt, basically. And then they started to get really upset, really angry with us, especially the Israeli ex-military who were living in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And the police actually came to protect us because they didn't want, have an international incident, on their hands.
Yeah. How many non-Zionists were you on your side?
We were 20.
Oh, wow. So still 3,000 to 20, it could have ended very badly.
So, it was, really tough. But we got a lot of, public support, at that time. Mm-hmm. One old Zionist, he tried to sort of, punch me in the face, I was handing out leaflets saying, peace now.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I even sort of said it in Hebrew, as people were coming into their demonstration, they thought that it was part of the demonstration, so they took the leaflet. And this one old man, when he read it, realized that it was anti-Zionist, he got so angry, he came and turned to me, with his fist and was going to punch me in the face, So I grabbed his hand, and there was a photographer from the Toronto Daily Star, as it was called at that time, took a picture and made the front page of the Toronto Star the next day. So,
wow. Oh, wow. Do you have a photo of that cover page, or?
No,
that's all right.
Yeah. It's in the microfilm, like at any library, I suppose.
I hear you. So, Doctor, if you could, just please tell us briefly about the history of the Jewish Bundist movement from, I guess, its inception until its contemporary iterations, if you will.
Okay. So we were the first anti-Zionist organization, before the Marxists. And the Marxists, were confused about Zionism. They didn't have, a solid position. And they came to support, Zionism to some extent as well. Like Zionist parties were even allowed, by the Bolsheviks to operate in the Soviet Union after the revolution, whereas the Jewish Bund was not allowed to operate freely. The Jewish Bund was always, the big rival, of both the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. Mm-hmm. You should realize that by 1903 even, just a few years after the founding of the Jewish Bund, which was founded basically by, adolescents, really. Oh yeah, that's why I have immense respect for your generation, because that's, where the innovation comes from. And 1903, the Second International, which contained both the Mensheviks and the Iskarists, as the Bolsheviks were called at the time, both of them, only allowed for affiliation to the Second International by way of a political party that was organized on the basis of a given nation state. Mm-hmm. So there was a German communist, German affiliate, Polish affiliate, all that sort of thing. And so there was no space in that political configuration for a Jewish political party, even if it was revolutionary socialist.
Wow.
And so that was the excuse that was used, to exclude the Jewish Bund, from the Second International in 1903. And that exclusion was supported, by the Iskarists, the Bolsheviks, at the same time as the Mensheviks.
Mm-hmm.
So we were expelled, from the Second International. Later on, there was a compromise in 1906, to allow them back in.
Nice.
But by then, there was a tremendous high level of alienation between all the political formations, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the reason why they had to be let back in is because the number of members that each political formation had, For example, the Bolsheviks at that time had 8,000 members. The Jewish Bund had 38,000 members.
Wow. So that's a significant portion of the socialist population, let's say, that they were being left alienated at the time. That's incredible.
Yes. Yeah. Totally ridiculous, totally counterproductive. And because the Jewish working class was generally, like socialists, whereas the Christian working class, if one could refer to such a phenomenon, was generally not socialists, that they were, easily manipulated by the prevailing authorities. And
the prevailing authorities were probably Christian in most part, I believe.
Yes, and the Christian nation state had a tremendous, control by way of religion, because the workers would be going to a meeting every week with their political leaders, who were their Christian political leaders, and they called it a church. And they would get sermons, which were basically political doctrine, and that's how, the working class was controlled at the time. Now, that has passed, Here in Quebec, for instance, the church, no longer has hegemony, to say the least, like in the 50s. Even though the flag of the province of Quebec comes from the Catholic Church, it was called the flag of the Sacred Heart.
Okay.
They just took the Sacred Heart out of the middle, and they kept the cross, and now this is supposed to be the flag of Quebec.
Yeah, wow. A nice secular state.
Yeah. They even had, a crucifix above the Speaker of the National Assembly for quite a while. It's
that's it.
removed, I understand.
Yeah, they just recently took it down with the whole hoopla that they were having about this charter of values and removing religion from the state completely, when in reality it's just targeting Muslim women primarily, let's be frank and honest.
Yeah, this is a copy of the French Christian nation state, which has banned, the wearing of the hijab, the hair covering.
Yeah.
And now Belgium has banned the burqa, which is the face covering and the body covering, which are traditional, dress, which are worn by Muslim women voluntarily. They're not compelled to do so by their husbands. Even if they're not married, they still wear a hijab, because it's considered to be a sign of modesty.
That's right.
So, I mean, if women, want to sort of, wear what they want to wear, and even, have slut walks in order to show that they have a right, to bare their bodies, because they feel comfortable that way. Well, why not, the other way as well? It depends, how women feel about themselves, and that should be the criteria, none other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, women's empowerment can take the form of modesty, or it could take the form, like you said, slut walks. And women's empowerment needs to be defined by women primarily. That goes without saying.
Yeah. So the Bund, continued on. And in the last elections, held in Poland, like in the city of Warsaw, the Bund won 17 out of 20, municipal Jewish seats. So,
very good.
Basically, we had hegemony, political hegemony over the Jewish working class. And, even above, the religious parties. So, but the problem being that although we are the logical political conclusion of what Jewish people should be aiming for in terms of, liberation as workers and both as a national entity, we have a double oppression. Nonetheless, all of the Jewish working class were killed off by the Nazis during the war.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the Zionists and the fascists, both say, oh, well, good, the Jewish socialists, were gotten rid of. And this pleases the Zionists, So they agree with the anti-Semites, They, whenever the Zionists, tell me that the Bund, is irrelevant and insignificant and no longer exists and all this. So I tell them, well, why don't you go find yourself a local neo-Nazi and invite him to, to have a beer with you, in a local tavern, and celebrate, your victory over this Bund. It's such insanity on the part of the Zionists, to say anything like that. I've even had one Zionist, tell me that I should have been killed by the Nazis.
That's disgusting. That's horrible.
Yeah,
but I guess so. The Zionists were working with the fascists in order to suppress the Jewish socialist working class.
The Zionists weren't working directly with the Nazis.
Okay.
They collaborated with the Nazis in order to save their own membership, first of all. Mm-hmm. But in order to do so, they had to shut their mouths. And they weren't allowed, to boycott the German Nazi regime. Mm-hmm. So they actually, had a commercial exchange, with the Nazi regime in order to get, their 60,000 members out of Germany. And they also made a deal, with Eichmann in Hungary to get, 1,843 or so, Jewish Zionists out of Hungary, while they were, they kept shut and didn't warn the Jewish community about, the Nazi death camps and how the Jewish people should have, escaped into the Soviet Union if they had, had confirmation, from some of these, Jewish leaders, so-called Jewish leaders. Mm-hmm. So there is that degree of collaboration. There was even, Eichmann was even invited, to go and visit, like Palestine under the tutelage of the Zionist movement, to see the project there, because the Zionists wanted to convince the Nazis that they could coexist, with the Nazi regime. Wow. Because at that time they assumed that the Nazis were going to win the war. Mm-hmm. So they wanted, to get themselves in a good position in which they could survive. This was geopolitics. Yeah. Very corrupt, politically corrupt, insane in effect. But this is what they did. So, there's a lot to blame, and this is not just the right-wing Zionists who are doing this. This is also, the left-wing Zionists, so-called socialists.
Yeah, as you said there, that the communists were very, pro-Zionist, let's say. Yes,
but even, the left Zionists, like Pro-Zion, which means proletarian Zionists, that's their name in Hebrew. And they were the ones, who had the militia called the Haganah, mm-hmm. which, carried out massacres, in so many, Palestinian villages to drive out the Palestinian population during the Nakba 1947, 48, and 49. Mm-hmm. And, it's so sad. And the Bundes weren't around, anymore, to stop that. So my purpose in working, was to regenerate, the Jewish Bundes movement, because one, it was necessary to counter the Zionist parties, and mm-hmm. two, we had to, organize the Jewish community again so that we could contend with anti-Semitism, as it existed and as it has regenerated. At first in the 50s, 60s, it wasn't, polite to be anti-Semitic, but the anti-Semitism still continued to exist. The first time I rebelled publicly was in grade 6, when I had a British professor, Mr. Gardner, who casually turned to the class one day and said, "And the Jews killed Christian babies during the Middle Ages," just like that, for no reason. It had no, connection with what he was talking about, which was something about science. Mm-hmm. So, I freaked out without permission. I didn't even put up my hand, without permission. I stood up because you were not allowed to stand up at that time without asking for permission by putting your hand up. Okay. And I pointed at him and I said, "That's a lie," in a rather loud voice. And this, freaked out the people and the professor so much that they were just frozen, paralyzed, mentally paralyzed, neurotic trance. I've never seen this, again. But, I realized I had such a power, with the words that I was able to formulate. And nobody said anything. And I realized, that this was getting to be dangerous for me, because the professor, he could retaliate against me in some sort of a way.
For sure.
So I just, sat down and kept quiet. Mm-hmm. But everybody knew, and nobody ever talked about it again until at the end of the year, we had a fight, with the professor, and ended up chasing me down and hitting me with a sponge ball that I had thrown at him.
Oh, geez. So you're a rebel from a young age, yeah?
This is grade 6, you know.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because, like, nowadays it seems like any mention of anti-Zionism is instantly conflated with anti-Semitism, you know?
Yes, well, because sometimes it is, you know.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
the anti-Semites, they use it, you know. They realized they had a good story to tell. So they use this, you know, whereas the Jewish communists said nothing. And whereas, you know, the Jewish Bundists, you know, the Western Jewish Bundists, you know, there was the Jewish Bund, you know, in New York and Toronto and Montreal, you know, since, you know, like long time, since the 30s.
Oh, wow.
But what did they do? Nothing. You know, I mean, the most you could say, you know, in terms of their political activities, was that they were, you know, like into promoting Yiddishkeit, you know, Yiddish language studies. You know, they had schools, and they had, you know, meeting place in which they have, you know, various festivals and this sort of thing. But they never said anything about, you know, Zionism until.
So it wasn't inherently politicized, you would say, at that time?
The Western Bundists, you know, were very conservative. You know, they were more like Mensheviks than they were, you know, like revolutionaries.
I hear you.
You know. And so I had to regenerate the Jewish Bund, you know, as a new Jewish Bund, as a Jewish socialist Bund, not just as an ordinary, you know, Jewish Yiddishkeit Bund. So it's been a big struggle, you know, like on various planes.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And in the West, that's where movements come to die, I guess.
Yeah. I worked with the Trotskyists from 1966 to 1976, and the Trotskyists were anti-Zionist, but they weren't pro-Bundist, you know.
So, how does that work out?
Well, they just, you know, like gave me autonomy, you know, and let me do whatever I wanted to do, you know, in the area, and it wasn't really included in their own sort of, you know, political programming, and they never sort of, you know, reported on this very much, and there weren't any articles in their press about it. So, you know, but they tolerated me, whereas the Communist Party was pro-Zionist at the time, you know, and they were in favor of recognizing the state of Israel and all that. And they were defending the state of Israel against its criticisms, against its critics, until 1967. And then the Communist Party had to oppose Israel because Israel had occupied, you know, Egypt and part of Syria, and I can't remember if it was part of Lebanon as well at the time. So, you know, for geopolitical reasons, the USSR decided to oppose Zionism. So then I made contact with one of the members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, Dr. Danny Goldstock, who was in the philosophy department at the University of Toronto. When we formed a committee there, he joined in the committee, and we were doing some good work until I was invited to go and visit the PLO in Beirut. And the Communist Party considered the PLO to be a terrorist organization at the time. And so he split and left the organization, left me on my own, and I had to continue by myself again.
PLO was, what is that? That's
The Palestine Liberation Organization.
That's it.
Yasser Arafat, you know, and all that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to work with the Palestine Embassy, that was basically the PLO, run by the Fatah faction. And even Hamas, you know, concedes that the Fatah party, you know, controls international diplomacy. So, you know, I was working with the PLO. I was, you know, PLO. That's why I founded the organization, the chapter of the Jewish Bund, you know, called the Jewish PLO, or the Jewish People's Liberation Organization. And then our manifesto was printed in the book that was published by the Clarity Press in 1989. And that's what launched, you know, a lot of the Jewish opposition movement in North America.
And you were telling me that you had a brief teaching stint in York University, but that it was cut short due to your pro-Palestinian activism. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and why is it so hard for people who support Palestine to, you know, teach or just live?
Yeah. Well, you know, I started my studies in physics and sciences. You know, I did my first degree in Bachelor of Science at the University of Waterloo. But in my third year, I decided to switch over to studying political science, because I was always involved, anti-Vietnam War work and civil rights work. And, it just became sort of, so much more of a priority to do political work than to study sciences, even though I loved, the mind expanding, like phenomena of what, science is in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
After the 1905 Einsteinian revolution, like everything, just opened up. And a whole new methodology, the old classical scientific method, of cause effect, was obsolete. The dialectics became, like a totally elaborated and scientific format. It was wonderful, to study something like that. But, the politics was so important, because, if there's no world left, what's the point, of studying, sciences anymore? And besides, like studying sciences, what can you do with that? Just contribute to the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
Like how are you supposed to do anything, with it, because they use, every little bit of information, every little discovery that can be made by anybody, So I ended up doing a study, of war research at the University of Waterloo, which is a science university. As it turned out, I got some information from the U.S. anti-war movement that was published in the Congressional Record that there was, U.S. military subsidies for research in Canadian universities. Just like, what? So, like I tracked it all down, found, all the professors and all the studies and all the names of their studies that were being done, published it, did an analysis, and it was printed by the student union at the time, which was controlled by the anarchists at the University of Waterloo. Okay. So then, like I got closer with the anarchists, because the Trotskyist, party wouldn't even publish my study. And so even though, the student union had allocated the resources, to publish, a special issue of our student, anti-war newspaper, the Trotskyist party, wouldn't publish the study itself. And they had, one of their good followers, publish a report about the study.
Oh, wow.
But not the study itself. So, I said, what's going on here?
What kind of a report? Was it like a scathing report that they wrote, or was it
no, just a report, pretending that it was their report and not mine. Okay. So, and then I met Jim Campbell of the anarchists, in Kingston, Waterloo. And I continued to work with him, on prisoner support, work in Toronto in a prisoner solidarity publication that was published in Toronto because it couldn't be published in the United States.
Wow.
And we printed, the letters of the American political prisoners at the time. So, and then there's so much, like.
I hear you. Feel free.
Then there was a movement, that some radical Christians started, against a military factory in Toronto that was producing the guidance system for the American cruise missile, which is a rather crucial component. It's the whole reason the cruise missile works. And it was being made, right there in Toronto.
Wow.
So we started to protest civil disobedience, to close down the entranceway to the factory and everything like this. Like 1 year, like we were being arrested continually, until there was a group out in British Columbia called Direct Action, anarchist group, of course, which was blowing up, like various, projects that were threatening the environment at the time. And they actually drove across country with their van filled with dynamite, brought it out in front of the Lytton factory in Toronto, and blew away the front wall. Said, look, you don't let the protest continue. Well, this is what you're going to get, in return.
Wow, that's I love that anarchist. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't even know what the word I'm looking for.
Sabotage.
Yeah. That's definitely when all else fails. I guess dynamite will do the trick.
Yeah, it did. It worked. And nobody was killed. So what's the big deal?
Okay, so they after this event, they had stopped construction of the.
Yeah, they had to.
Nice.
But then the United States military brought the cruise missile into Canada to test it during the wintertime, January the 15th, in Alberta at a testing range there, at a Canadian military testing range. Okay. So why would they do this? Why would they bring the cruise missile to test it out, in freezing temperatures, minus 20 degrees, minus 30 degrees, that sort of thing, like out west? because they wanted to be able to use the cruise missile to attack the USSR over the North Pole.
Wow.
And when they were testing it, they would shoot it towards the north, of course. Okay, and it wasn't known, how far they were going, with this, and whether it was, loaded with a nuclear weapon or not, And this was a secret, testing agreement that the very famous rad liberal, supposedly, rad liberal Prime Minister of Canada at the time called, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the Prime Minister, yeah. He made this, military agreement with the United States secret, which is illegal, according to Canadian law, because any military pact like that has to be approved of by the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. So even the Conservative Party was upset with this because they were, Canadian nationalists, from the time of Diefenbaker, who forbid the Beaumark missile to be placed in Canada, because Canadians didn't want to have nuclear missiles, in their territory, because they were so turned off, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was considered to be, some sort of savagery.
Even the Conservatives had some sense at the time, I guess.
Yeah. So, the Conservatives, broke the story in the House of Commons saying that, Trudeau had made a secret military pact with the United States. And of course, all the leftist supporters of Trudeau freaked out. And so it removed support from the Liberal Party to favor the Conservative Party, because people wouldn't vote for the Liberal Party anymore and the Conservatives would win. That was their strategy.
Yeah, it seems like that's really always how it goes, right?
Right. So when I found out about this, because I was doing research every day in all the newspapers, at the Palestine office, and I come across, this article, and I find, wow. So what I did is I went, with some anarchist friends, to the House of Commons gallery, the public gallery there. Anybody can go into the gallery and watch, the proceedings of the House of Commons. And so the Conservative, and so the Prime Minister had to agree, to have the whole, military pact to test the cruise missile voted upon in the House of Commons because it was legally required. And so the Conservative, guy got up and said, this, was something that they opposed. And so just after he finished, I stood up in the gallery and shouted out, "No cruise, no way." And then people, all looked up, because nobody had ever done this before, nobody had ever spoken from the gallery, the public gallery, before in the House of Commons. And it was recorded, by, CBC radio and broadcast, right across the country, maybe even live broadcast. Okay.
Nice.
So, so of course they dragged me out.
I just want to say we see a continuity from your grade 6 self over here now.
Really? So then, some young people came and said they wanted to continue the protest, and they brought T-shirts, saying, "No cruise," and they, hid it underneath their shirts. And then it came into the House of Commons, sat there, and at one point, all together, they all took off their shirts, they stood up, and they didn't say anything. They just showed, the T-shirts, that spelled out all together, "No cruise." Mm-hmm. So then they were taken out. So then, with those four, we said, well, we're going to start up, I said, yeah, why don't we start a protest on the lawn in front of the House of Commons? And they said, yes, okay. And I said, but I want to make it a continual, like indefinite, protest until they stop the cruise missile testing. They said, okay, but they weren't willing to stay there, like full time.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Really, like sort of difficult. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, we made an agreement, that they would apply for a permit from the RCMP, for a 4-day protest. Even though I knew from my political science studies that unlike the United States, in Canada, all the lands, that belong to the state are called common lands, because the old, crown lands in England during the English Revolution were socialized, so and it became public parks or common lands. And the levelers, also were part of this, whole process. They were like, ancient, British anarchists. And they called for the removal of fencing around, lands that were supposed to be public, but previously belonged to the Crown. So I knew that, Parliament Hill in Ottawa was a public, property. And, if you had political reason to be there, you could have a protest. Yeah. That this would be constitutionally, protected in a way, under the liberty of expression provisions of the law. So I knew I could fight this. I knew I could, keep a peace camp going there. And some other people agreed with me, and we kept it going. And then the first winter, I was ready to pack it up. Who's going to stay out in the winter time? In a tent on Parliament Hill, like in Ottawa, like minus 20, minus 30 degrees.
Oh.
But some other people did, because we were getting an amazing press. And so, they stayed, and then they made it through. So just use a lot of blankets, that's all,
Yeah, that's it. Layers and layers and layers.
So the next summer, became very popular. People came from all over the country, hitchhiking across country to join up. And then at the end of the summer, they were going to give up. And then I came along and I said, okay, I'll keep it going, the next winter. So with a guy from Chicoutimi, Yvon Dubé, who was my French teacher,
Nice.
my Quebecois teacher, we decided to keep it going. And we built this cabin basically on Parliament Hill, based upon, brick sleds with a layer of, cardboard, with a layer of carpets, with a layer of sleeping bags, foam mattresses, and then sleeping bags, and then a lot of covers. Okay. And then inside the walls of the tent that we built, with poles of, office poles that we found, all the stuff we found, in the trash, around Ottawa, in all the offices there. And we had, 1-inch styrofoam that we bought for $100. Okay. And we built, we even had, a nice kerosene heater inside there. And then we even had, and we used it, to cook on. And we had a DC, light bulb there.
Luxury, real luxury.
Yeah. So we made it through the winter, again. So it lasted, 2 years, this protest.
Wow. That's impressive, to be quite honest. I can't imagine contemporarily any kind of movement, a sustained movement lasting for 2 years like that. Props.
Right. And then, that's when Trudeau resigned. He went out for a walk one night in the snowstorm on Parliament Hill. You saw the peace camp there still. And, he resigned after that. He gave up.
Pierre Elliott Trudeau you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
He forced him to resign.
Nice.
Out of shame.
Yeah, maybe we should, for those of us younger ones, I'm not too young, I'm 30 years old, but maybe we should be learning from those experiences to maybe oust this new Trudeau.
Yes. Things like that can be done, like direct actions, but non-violent direct actions that can be accomplished, very easily. It just takes a question of will. It's willpower that counts.
Yeah, and I guess it is harder for people to stay out in the streets for sustained periods of time. Like I can't even imagine doing that. I'm forced basically to work 40 hours a week. It's really, really hard. But that is the key. It really is the key. These one-off protests, they're not going to do anything. We learned that the sustained protests are really what put the pressure on. Yeah,
just like in the United States during the Black Lives Matter revolt, there was autonomous zones that were set up. People took control of their area, to control the streets, and controlled who was coming into their area. So no fascists were allowed in, of course, which meant that they wouldn't have any violence imported into their communities by the fascists.
For sure.
By the fascist infiltration of the police.
Yeah, and I mean there are problems with those autonomous zones, more notably that they're bound to just fail. They were temporary autonomous zones. They were meant to be temporary. And another problem with that was they need to be defended. How could they be defended? You know what I mean? So yeah, that's obviously another problem. But yeah, they were great initiatives. And as we saw with the uprisings in the United States, that movements can completely be crushed by an election. Like the election of Biden, and now we don't see very much. You know what I mean?
Yes. But it forced the police to be more cautious. I've seen an estimate, that because of the protests during this period of time, 300 fewer Black Americans were killed.
Nice.
Yeah, these protests have saved the lives of 300 Black Americans, as a result, because police are afraid to kill anybody now.
It's a very good way of looking at it, like with that. Very often we get these, cynical views about as my view was a little bit cynical, but yeah, it is nice to hear that silver lining. It is really nice. And let's hope that can last and it'll be represented in the statistics as well,
Okay, but to get back to your previous question, sure. I ended up, being invited to teach at York University because I converged, with the Waffle faction. Waffle was a Canadian left nationalist formation that developed inside the New Democratic Party, which is the Social Democratic Party of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And the Waffle were suppressed by the leadership of the NDP, and so but they existed in other areas, like in academia. They had a whole department, a social and political thought department, set up at York University, which still exists today, alongside the political science department. They were also inside the political science department. And they invited me to teach, a course. I said, well, sure, okay.
Why not?
Like, why not? And this is when I was a graduate student, even though, my undergraduate degree was in sciences. But, all those years I was always reading political theory. So, I was more advanced, than most graduate students, because most graduate students weren't allowed, basically to have read, revolutionary socialist political theory. It wasn't part of the curriculum. So I developed, a socialist, course in which I had the freedom, to actually advocate, for socialism in the course and to prove it empirically, with the statistical studies that were done by Clement, for example, who showed that the bigger corporations in Canada were controlled by American multinationals, which set up subsidiaries in Canada to jump over the tariff barrier of 20%, at the border.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we showed, how Canada was an economic dependency of the United States, basically the backyard of the United States, and that Canada was, manipulated, to provide a basin of super exploitation because, the American companies made more money here in Canada than they would have, in the United States because they were paying lower wages here and they didn't pay the tariff tax. And then they would cheat, the Canadian government for taxation purposes by sending back money, by money transfers back to the parent corporation as an internal money flow operation. And then the Canadian subsidy would then declare they didn't have as much profit as they would otherwise, so they would pay less tax, even while they were getting subsidies to set up, in Canada by the Canadian government from public funds. So it's,
It's
so
predatory. This is predatory behavior.
So, I explained all this in the course, it was wonderful. But all the lectures for that course, were destroyed. When I got arrested in Canada, in Ottawa, later on. I lost all those lectures, a whole other book, on Canadian political economy I lost. I was arrested because, after they destroyed the peace camp, when the new Conservative government came in, after promising not to destroy the peace camp, they destroyed it, arrested us at 7:10 in the morning.
This was the Conservative government under the Conservatives? Okay.
And after the Liberals, were defeated by the Tories.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came in, and tore the place apart. And and they would, detain us, for 3-4 hours, Then I would come back, we would come back and sleep on the grass, basically, in the protests, and this was getting continual media coverage, across Canada.
Yeah.
We had 80% support of the Canadian public, and according to a poll.
Wow.
So, just a few of us, were in an apprehended insurrection, basically.
Hey, never underestimate the power of small groups to make big changes.
Really, So then eventually, when I went back during the election and the Prime Minister Mulroney, got worried. So then they had me arrested and put into prison. So I was put into prison at that time. This connects with what I was saying before. And while I was in prison, my roommate allowed in a bunch of people. I don't know who they were, off-duty police or military who came from the military base, just north of Ottawa, who used to attack the peace camp at night on the weekends all the time. They came in, they trashed the whole place. They took all my papers, threw them out. All my violin, my camera, everything, was trashed.
Fucking scum.
And the landlady threw it all out. And I lost, the whole book of lectures on political economy of Canada.
This was the apartment that you were living in?
Yeah, in Ottawa, after the peace camp was destroyed.
That's disgusting. I'm so sorry to hear that, but that is the nature of repression and
Oh,
fascist
yeah.
action. Yeah,
Yeah, it's serious, very serious, you know.
yeah.
We used to get attacked by soldiers, on their off time. They would go and drink in Ottawa until 3 o'clock, until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Hmm.
And then they would come and they would attack us, for fun. They would try to bust up, the walls so that we'd freeze inside.
Hmm.
And, one time when Yvon Dubé, I should mention his name, Chef de Quebec, he called himself.
Chef de Quebec.
Yeah, well, it was sort of a bit of an ego trip there.
Yeah.
But anyway, like during the day, I was working in the Palestine office, as a chargé d'affaires. I was a diplomat,
Hmm.
working in the Palestine embassy during the day. He would keep it going, and I'd come back at night, make supper on the burner, and we'd talk in French, and I'd learn French that way.
Okay, so you do speak French. I wanted to ask you, you do speak French?
Mais oui, bien vu.
Eh oui.
Oui, je suis québécois maintenant, c'est pas problème.
Alors, si tu parles la langue, t'es vraiment québécois.
Mais oui, c'est ça, c'est comme ça. Avec un qui était mon prof. Yeah, this guy, he was my French teacher, from Chicoutimi.
Nice.
I learned, Québécois.
Hmm.
And so then when I was in prison, they started testing the cruise missile again. So what could I do? I couldn't go back to Parliament Hill. I was in prison.
Mm.
So what do? Nothing? Just sit there, and moan? No. I went on a hunger strike.
Oh,
Called
shit.
called up the media because, we had one illegal right, for prisoners to have access to a telephone.
Hmm.
Called up the media. I had a list of all the media. Called them all up, and I said I was going to go on a hunger strike, the following morning. Like an hour after I called up the media, this guard comes and says, come here, I was in a dormitory. Come over here, he says, did you call the media and say that you were going to go on a hunger strike? And I said, yes, tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, just wait a minute, stay there, don't move, wait a minute. He spoke like that.
Yeah.
Went to the lieutenant, comes back and says, come with me. So I go to the lieutenant, and he holds like a trial. Because, inside a prison, they have their own laws, laws within the law.
Mm-hmm.
And these internal laws, they don't correspond, with the laws on the outside of the prison, because you don't have any more democratic rights anymore. You don't have any more constitutional rights, Prisoners are not, citizens anymore.
That's right.
And in the United States, they're not even allowed to vote. So I go before the lieutenant, and, and he says, are you on a hunger strike? And I said, well, I will be in the morning, I'm not on a hunger strike right away. He said, no. According to the regulations, anybody who is disrupting, the prison from the inside like that is going to solitary.
Oh,
so
shit.
Okay, so I was sent to solitary right away.
Whew.
Okay, it gets worse. Okay.
I'm listening.
This is, this is how, political prisoners are treated, in a
Yeah, I hear you.
democratic, country. This is liberal democracy, So in prison, and so, even in solitary confinement, I still had a right to use a telephone. Mm-hmm. So I turned the solitary cell into like an office.
Nice.
And, I would call the media up every day, give them a report, of what it was like, to be on a hunger strike, and find out information about, the cruise missile testing. And so every time, it was announced on the media and on the radio, CBC, radio in particular, would announce every time that there was a cruise missile test, they would say, in a very somber voice, cruise missile test, took place today, from such and such time to such and such a time, giving, useless information. And then they would add at the end that the prisoner in protesting cruise missile testing is still on a hunger strike. Every time that there was a cruise missile test. So it just grew and grew and grew. And then they started to freak out, they were trying to sort of, make me give up, the hunger strike. And the guards even had a bet game going on as to how long I would last. Okay. Now, the trick to doing the hunger strike, and that I read about, from the IRA prisoners on a hunger strike, Bobby Sands in particular, is that in order to survive a hunger strike, although you don't eat, you have to take water.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay? Otherwise, you don't last 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take water. But in order for the water to be retained by your body, there has to be a little bit of salt in the water, Otherwise, you just piss it out.
Okay.
Okay, because we are basically sea creatures. We come from the sea.
Mhm.
That was our biology. So you have to take a little bit of salt in the water for it to be, like retained, so you don't become dehydrated. So I kept, the salt from all the meals that they gave me and turned back the meals. So this one guard who was a fascist, he tricked me into talking, because I was so spaced out, like I would say nearly everything.
Yeah.
And I told him, about the salt, because he told me about the bet game that the guards, were undertaking. So I wanted to, clue him, that I was going to be able to last a long time, that he should bet on me, lasting a long time, So,
Yeah.
so I would have, somebody, to perhaps, help me out. No way.
Nah.
So he reported, me to the warden, who came into the cell, held another, trial.
Yeah.
Another trial there, with 3 guards, to protect them, and I was standing up against the wall. And he said, do you have salt here? And I said, yeah, I have some salt there. I need it, for my water retention. So he said, oh, this is an infraction. It's against the rules, because if any prisoner hoards, salt, that means that you can crush it up into a powder and then, and hide it in your hand. And when a guard comes to bring you a meal, you can open up your hand, blow into the powder, which blows into the guard's eyes, incapacitates the eyes of the guard, and then you can grab their keys and then liberate yourself and run out of the prison.
This is such a far stretch. It's unbelievable.
Okay, so they confiscated all of the salt.
Fuck.
And then any other meal they brought, there was no salt. And I turned back the meals, and so then I started to become dehydrated. And then a lawyer came in, and I told him about this. And I was, after like 5 days, like of no salt and no water retention, like I was turning like purple because it was so cold. It was the winter time there. And the only thing they gave me, to wear was, a t-shirt.
Wow.
Not even a second t-shirt, And it was in a cell that was on the wind side of the northern side, of the prison, so that the wall was like freezing. If I showed the warden when I touched the wall and took my hand away, I showed him my hand was purple. But he didn't care.
Oh, for sure. Trying to look for sympathy or empathy in a place where there is none.
So, I just want to explain, what it's like, for a political prisoner, what can happen to you in a prison, in this, like country, let alone the United States of America. Mm-hmm. So, and so then Professor Magnet, who was a professor at the University of Ottawa, constitutional professor, Jewish guy who was a non-Zionist. Mm-hmm. So he actually went and applied to a judge with habeas corpus, saying that I should be released, because of the doubtfulness of my incarceration and the extreme conditions that I was being subjected to, mm-hmm. and the fact that I was dying of dehydration. And I got released eventually, yeah.
Nice. Now, after how long were you released?
2 weeks.
Okay, so you were there for 2 weeks, and you were supposed to stay how long?
Well, there was another month of incarceration that I was supposed to go through, and so
okay.
That was outstanding. I was supposed to go back to trial for that. But,
okay. Anyway. And so, yeah, I guess you couldn't teach after that because of whatever criminal record.
No, I had police record before that. Before I talked to like I was arrested at the age of 18. And when I was in demonstrating at the Canadian National Exhibition, when Pierre Trudeau came to speak, to a crowd during an election campaign, and I went there to protest against youth unemployment and got arrested there at that time as well, because I was handing out leaflets like right in front of him while he was talking. So.
Yeah, but I imagine that wasn't a criminal charge, was it?
No. No, they didn't even charge me after 4 hours to let me go,
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know, so. But the reason why I never got teaching again was because I had worked for the Palestine embassy, and I put it in my CV and everything, no problem.
That's it. That's what it was for. Really, this anti-Palestinian sentiment that kept the universities from hiring you. And you see that even in the universities today, where any actions against BDS or something like this is considered anti-Semitism. There's a lot of craziness.
Yeah. I try to sort of convince people that boycott, divestment, this investment and sanctions is supposed to be considered anti-Semitic because Israel is supposed to be a Jewish state, which it is not. It's a Zionist state.
That's right.
There's 7.5 million Jewish people living in the United States, and only 6.5 million living inside the state of Israel. So like, who actually represents the Jewish people? The Jewish Americans or the state of Israel? Like empirically, it's Jewish Americans. So. And Jewish Americans, do not support the policies of the state of Israel. They're in the majority, a big majority, opposed to the occupation of the West Bank and previously of Gaza Strip, and they're in favor of a democratic society in which the Palestinians have equal rights.
And just shifting to Palestine here, I saw those photos of you confronting the IDF and all this kind of stuff. So tell me, please, a little bit about your experiences in Palestine and what you witnessed over there. I know Jason Unruhu also posted a short video about you where there was a little bit of a scuffle. If you could go into that. I know it's been an hour now, but if you want to continue going, I'm down. Let's continue.
Really? It's been an hour already. Wow, there's so much to tell, like.
Hey, I'm okay. I gotta leave work. That doesn't matter. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So what I did and what we did in Palestine, started in 1903. After Rochelle Corrie was killed, very heroically in Gaza at Rafah, trying to stop, a Zionist bulldozer, military bulldozer, from crushing the home of a Palestinian doctor who was considered to be too close to the border. Because he was going to, build dig out a tunnel in his basement that would go across the border into Egypt, supposedly. Okay.
Fuck.
So a number of us in the world, freaked out and said, okay, we're going to go to Palestine and replace Rochelle Corrie and resist the occupation there. So I went to Nablus because a Palestinian friend, gave me contact, with there that I could go and work with, as a volunteer for Palestinian Civil Society Association called Tanweer, Palestinian Cultural Enlightenment Forum in Nablus, which still exists. So, they came into existence in 2006. No, in 2003, I was on my own. So I heard about protests in the refugee camp of Balata, as it's called, being organized by the ISM, International Solidarity Movement. So I got in contact with them and I was working with them. Every day I would go there and we would carry out actions, together with one member, Tom Herndl from England, a photographer, who later on went to Rafah and Gaza, and he was killed, shot in the head, thereafter. So 10 of us were working together. 4 of us were actually Jewish, one of whom was a black Jewish woman from Sweden. So we were quite a diverse, crowd. And we'd go out, and stand in front of the soldiers and stop them from coming into the camp, that sort of thing. But they would come in anyway, in an armored personnel carrier, right down the, the main street, the market street, of the camp. And, everybody would run away from them, because they can open up a flap and stick out their gun and shoot anybody anytime, because they would impose a curfew, on the Palestinian population, so stringent that they couldn't even go out, to go shopping for food. Ugh. So we'd go out and try to stop that. And then that didn't, people would, were encouraged, by our presence there because we would protect them because they couldn't shoot anybody if there were these internationals there, Okay, so then they brought in a bulldozer and they dumped, a 6 feet high barrier of earth and stones, at the entranceway and the exit, to the market street so that, no deliveries could be brought into the camp, with food. Wow. So we went out, with shovels, and we were digging away at it, to make a pathway over the mound. And then this jeep pulls up, with 2 soldiers who come in, and one soldier comes in and announces that what we were doing was illegal. Illegal according to what law? Israel law, but that wasn't Israel. It was Nablus. So I turned to him and I said, no, what you are doing is illegal. And the Israeli protest dissident group, Geshalom, is warning, soldiers that they're going to be charged in the future if they carry out illegal activities under international law, which is now, under adjudication, because the ICC, International Criminal Court, is investigating the Israeli soldiers now for what they were doing in the West Bank and what the Air Force is doing on Gaza. They even bombed Gaza last night again.
Oh, wow.
So, he stole our shovels, and but he didn't shoot us. So,
At least.
yeah. So, we continued, digging away, and the women start to come. The women were, like more heroic than the men. The women would come out, and start, going shopping, whereas the men were hiding away inside the homes.
Mhm. Would there be more of a propensity for the soldiers to be abusive towards the men rather than the women, or was it kind of?
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. Men would be shot.
That's
women
it. That's
would
what
not.
I thought.
So then the Palestinians got encouraged, by our action, which worked. And a Palestinian bulldozer operator came and removed the whole mound, the next day. It was cleared away.
Hmm.
And so one more day, and they didn't come back to replace it, The military gave up because we were there and because the Palestinians, had taken this action.
Nice.
They realized, if they put down another barrier, that it would just be taken away again.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is resistance. This is how resistance worked. Plus, there was a huge barrier put up on the main highway in front of the previous governmental headquarters, for the Palestinian Authority on Jerusalem Street in Nablus. And people couldn't even use, like the main road there. They were using side roads, to get in and out of the city.
Hmm.
So then the mayor of the city decided, let's take advantage of this opportunity. And they sent bulldozers, to take away the big barrier on the main highway. And the highway was opened up after that. Okay. Then the next step was that they went to the Mikata, as it's called, the governmental headquarters, and clear away the rubble because it had been destroyed, by tank fire and by airplanes, missiles. And that's where Arafat. That's when Arafat was held under siege, as well in 2001. When General Sharon, who became prime minister, carried out this, this war against the Palestinian people. So the rubble was cleared away, and they built a new Makata and everything, just because there was this initiative, and the resistance was shown to be successful, and so they continued the resistance in this way. So that was 2003. And then I came back in 2015 because the military came and broke into a community organization called Tanweer, which I mentioned,
Hmm.
and they stole all the computers and everything. So, I got pissed off, came back, set up a new computer, because I had set up a computer room, because at the time there was no, smartphones,
Hmm.
So for Palestinians, to be able to get access to the internet, they had to have a computer and an internet connection. So I set that up, we had 8 computers there.
Nice.
And the military came in at night, broke open the door, and stole all the hard drives from all the computers to see what information they can get. But, of course, we didn't leave any information on the computers, So back in 2015, and I slept in the office of that place so that the military could not come back. Because if they were going to come back, they would have to arrest me, a Jewish second-generation Holocaust survivor, which is impossible if they were going to retain, the pretext that they were a Jewish state.
Yeah, it's not very good for optics.
No, so I caught them in this contradiction. And so they didn't come back. They never came back, and I kept on coming back, for 5 months at a time, the maximum time I could leave Canada and still retain, a medical card here. So kept on going back, to protect that community center, and we had to organize doing demonstrations, planting expeditions, and educational programs of all sorts. So, it's possible to even, resist the, military occupation force.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And you went there and you really ameliorated some material conditions. You brought them internet, you brought them things like this. This is very interesting, very nice to hear. And how long did you stay in Palestine in that second stint?
5 months.
Oh, wow, wow.
I'm coming back in 2016, 2017, 2018, until the pandemic, when I couldn't go back.
Okay, you would keep going on a yearly basis.
I was living in Palestine. I became a Nabusi, and I'm a Nabusi, as we say in Arabic. I began to learn Arabic as well.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. So,
and yeah. Anyways, go on.
So in Palestine, I'm called Dr. Abraham, and I'm considered to be a Palestinian, a Jewish Palestinian.
Nice.
There's also a whole tribe of Jewish Palestinians who live on at the summit of the mountain, on Mount Gerizim, called Samaritans.
Okay, yeah.
And they have, Palestinian documentation, Israeli citizenship, and Jordanian citizenship as well.
Wow.
And they consider themselves to be Palestinians. They speak Arabic. And the older men, they wear traditional dress, And, they walk around, and everybody knows that they're Jewish, but they're just considered to be sort of like normal Palestinians, just like anybody else. There's no problem. The Palestinians don't hate Jewish people.
Absolutely.
They just hate soldiers carrying guns who call themselves Jewish,
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's like a similar situation here where I don't think like indigenous people necessarily have hatred, but we are settlers. We are settlers, and there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, tremendous alienation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. That's why we have to each mutually offer us mutual recognition for each of our liberation struggles. Recognize that each of us have organizational autonomy, for national cultural autonomy, national cultural territorial autonomy, even for the First Nations and for the Black Nation. And we have to form a united front in order to combat the fascist forces which have infiltrated and taken over, many police departments, the FBI, and many military units as well. So I think this is, a point at which we could sort of, end for the moment. But I would like to come back and talk with you about, Montreal politics.
Absolutely.
The student general strike of 2012, when we won, we stopped tuition fee increase and we brought down the government at that time. So let's look forward to that interview later on, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very special place in my heart. So I look forward to talking to you about that. And thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, I've learned so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I do look forward to the next time, Dr. Weizfeld.
Thank you. Isn't this so great? Oh, this is wonderful to get I was like this.
I love it, eh? Solidarity forever.
Okay, solidarity forever and never again.
Solidarity, comrades.